Hi, I'm Aurelia. At my fiancé's funeral, his mother looked me dead in the eye and said, "You were never family, just a phase." They called me a gold digger, a leech. I didn't argue, I didn't scream, I just listened. But when the will was read aloud, the whole room fell silent. They thought they had buried him and erased me, but he left one final truth. And when it surfaced, everything they built, every lie, crumbled. Would you have stayed silent too? Or would you have made them regret every word? Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from? What time is it there? Drop a comment. I read everyone. The zipper stuck halfway up my back, and I didn't have the strength or will to fight it anymore. The dress had never quite fit. Malric once said it made me look like winter stepped into the room. But right now, I just felt cold. Not the kind that comes from weather, but the kind that settles under your skin when a house that once held your laughter won't even return your footsteps anymore. Outside the guest house window, snow clung to the branches like tired secrets. The estate was still, except for the occasional sound of someone preparing something I wasn't invited to. I'd been moved here, the far side of the property, right after he passed. They called it for privacy. But it felt like exile. The room was sterile, like no one had ever loved here, like no one ever would. On the desk, where Malric once left little sketches of me, doodles in ink when he thought I wasn't watching, there was nothing now. Even the small wooden box he gave me, filled with his charcoals, had disappeared. "Family orders," the maid said without eye contact, as if I were some tenant overstaying her lease. I didn't argue. I never did. That was my mistake. I'd mistaken silence for dignity. I sat down and unfolded a worn piece of paper. My eulogy. The one I wouldn't get to read. "I loved you when the world turned quiet," I began aloud, voice barely rising above the hum of the heater. "And I'll love you when it forgets your name. You saw me." That was enough. I paused, then folded it again and tucked it into my coat pocket. It would stay unread. Like most of my truths, the walk to the chapel was long and bitter. I chose not to take the car they sent. I didn't want their pity or their eyes on me when I arrived. I could feel the way my heels crunched on the gravel path, slow and sharp. I kept my eyes down as I entered. Inside, warmth and whispers collided. The room smelled of old wood, lilies, and money. People turned to look, then looked away too quickly. The front rows were filled. I moved toward them instinctively, toward the family I thought I was going to be part of. Isolde turned her head slowly. Her lips barely parted as she whispered, "Those seats are for family." I froze. My stomach twisted, but I didn't respond. There was no place for emotion here, not mine. I nodded once, short, sharp, and turned toward the far left side of the room. Alone. A man in a navy suit blinked awkwardly at me, then shifted 2 seats down. He didn't want to be mistaken for someone who knew me. The service blurred past, verses, violins, vows none of them believed. I caught eyes now and then. Most offered nothing. A few softened briefly before darting away. Malric's father didn't even look up when my name was mentioned, just a passing phrase in a litany of condolences. His longtime companion, Aurelia. That's all I was now, a footnote in his life. Later, in the reception hall, the walls echoed with polite murmurs and clinks of silver on porcelain. I hovered near the window, fingers around a glass of untouched cider. No one came near. Then she did. Isolde. She moved through the crowd like she owned the air. Her dress was perfect, tailored grief. She stopped inches from me and raised her glass. "I hope you weren't expecting anything," she said too calmly. "He never told us he was engaged. Not once. You were a nice distraction, but let's not pretend you mattered." I swallowed nothing, let it burn all the way down. She leaned in slightly, voice softer now. "You can leave. Now would be best." And just like that, dismissed. I stepped out without a word. Not because I had none, but because I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of hearing them. Outside, the sky had turned slate gray, matching the way my ribs felt, compressed, tight, like my heart was folded too small to be useful. I sat on the stone bench behind the garden wall. We used to sit here, Malric and I, between holidays and headaches, away from the formality of everything. I touched the base of my ring finger. The indent was still there. He gave it to me on this bench, quietly, without ceremony. "Let's tell them after the holidays," he'd said. "Let them have their traditions. Then we'll have ours." They never found out. And now, he never would. I pulled my coat tighter. Somewhere behind me, voices and laughter picked up again. Life, as they knew it, continued. My part had ended. I heard the crunch of deliberate footsteps before I saw the man. Older. Tall, with a gray coat and sharp eyes that softened when they met mine. "Miss Aurelia?" he asked gently. "I'm with Gallagher and Finch. Mr. Malric made some changes 3 weeks ago. He was very specific. He asked that you be present for the reading. This afternoon." My breath caught, just enough to make me blink. He waited, respectfully. Then I nodded, slowly standing. "Of course," I said. And without another word, I followed him inside, quietly, like a shadow they forgot could move. I followed him inside, quietly, like a shadow they forgot could move. The carpet muted our footsteps as we crossed into the old legal study at the rear of the house. The air was different here, less floral, more leather and varnish. A single brass lamp glowed on the long conference table. Mr. Claiborne nodded at me with a tight expression. He looked as though he'd already braced for the storm. They were all there. Isolde, in a black silk sheath and fox-like silence, didn't even pretend to acknowledge me. Dorian lounged in a wingback chair, legs crossed, polishing his cufflinks like this was another wine-tasting event. 2 aunts, 1 uncle I vaguely remembered from a Thanksgiving long ago, and 3 younger cousins tapping on their phones with disinterest. I didn't speak, just lowered myself into the empty seat near the window, not close enough to seem presumptuous, not far enough to look like I was hiding. The room buzzed with the low rustle of fabric, the soft click of manicured nails on screens, the occasional sniff. No one made eye contact with me. Not even by accident. Mr. Claiborne cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming. I'll keep this brief and respectful. The will you're about to hear was filed and witnessed under full legal conditions, signed by Mr. Malric Bramley 3 weeks prior to his passing." Isolde exhaled audibly. "Let's get it over with." The first few pages were routine. Donations to arts foundations, scholarships in his grandfather's name, a sizable gift to a conservation group in Vermont, a nod to a godson who lived overseas, names I didn't recognize, faces that weren't present. Boredom settled in like dust. Dorian actually yawned, and then, "To Miss Aurelia Bren, my fiancé and the woman I trust more than anyone, I leave the following." The silence snapped tight, like a glass pane under pressure. No one moved. Dorian let out a soft, incredulous chuckle. "That's not possible." Claiborne continued, voice steady, as if reading grocery items. "The lakefront cabin at Esme Point, all rights to the full collection of his written works, journals, and annotations, 30% equity in Bramtech Systems, and 1 sealed personal envelope to be opened only by the recipient." My breath caught, but I kept my face still. My hands gripped the fabric of my coat on my lap, knuckles white. Isolde's chair scraped sharply against the floor as she stood. "Absolutely not." Her voice didn't shake. It cracked like a whip. "She manipulated him. He was not in his right mind. He was recovering from surgery. This is fraud." Claiborne barely looked up. "Mrs. Bramley, the will is legally binding. It was signed during a lucid period, notarized and witnessed by 2 unrelated parties." "I want those witnesses called," she snapped. "They've already submitted sworn affidavits." His tone was clipped, final. A ripple of discomfort moved through the room. One of the cousins whispered, "She was with him almost every day those last few weeks." Another murmured, "She even took him to his appointments. None of us did." Isolde turned toward them, her glare sharp enough to cut. They shut up immediately. "You don't get to sit there," she hissed at me, "and pretend you were his equal. You were entertainment. You were convenient." I looked at her, Just looked. Not cold, not angry, not smug, just quiet. "You were a guest in this house," she added. "Don't forget that." Mr. Claiborne cleared his throat again, pulling a slim envelope from his briefcase. "This was left specifically for Miss Bren. I was instructed to deliver it in private, but given the atmosphere, perhaps now is best." He slid it across the table toward me. Isolde made a disgusted noise and sat down with force. I didn't reach for the envelope right away. My palms were damp, my chest tight. Instead, my mind floated back to a morning 2 months ago. Malric had brought me coffee in a chipped ceramic mug, still wearing pajama pants and socks that didn't match. We sat on the old couch by the fire, curled up under a blanket like teenagers. "Will you help me with something?" he'd asked. "Of course. I'm updating something kind of important. A letter. A legacy thing. Just in case." I'd rolled my eyes. "You're 38. He grinned. "Exactly. Which means I've got maybe 40 more years of people thinking I'm irresponsible." He didn't show me the whole letter, just asked if I thought the words were fair, if the tone was kind, if it sounded like him. "They'll never see you coming," he'd said with a smirk, and I love that. Back in the present, the envelope sat in front of me like it had weight beyond paper. No one spoke. Dorian had stopped playing with his cufflinks. Even the cousins had stopped texting. I opened it under the edge of the table, careful not to make noise. Inside was a single sheet of folded stationery, and beneath it, a photograph. My fingers paused. My heartbeat thudded, hot in my ears. I turned the photo over. It was old, faded slightly at the edges, but the image was unmistakable. There he was, Malric, standing on the porch of a cabin I'd never seen, arm around a young boy, a woman beside him, but not his mother, not anyone I recognized, and taped to the back was a name I wasn't supposed to know. I tucked the photo into the sleeve of my coat before anyone could notice. It was already late. The hall had thinned out, voices fading down corridors as guests made their way to their cars, murmuring about the storm rolling in. I stepped away from the table, still clutching the sealed envelope, barely aware of my own breathing. I didn't make it 2 steps before Isolde blocked the narrow hallway. She didn't touch me, but she didn't have to. Her perfume, heavy and sickly sweet like dried lilies, hung thick in the space between us. "You were never family," she said, her voice a low hiss only I could hear. "Just a phase, like the last one, like the one before her." Behind her, Dorian leaned against the banister with a cigar already lit, lips curled in amusement. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. He never did. That family had perfected the art of passive violence. I looked at Isolde. Really looked. Her pearls, her perfect posture, the chill in her voice that could split glass. There was no rage behind her words, only certainty. I realized then, she didn't hate me because of what I'd done. She hated me because of who I wasn't. She turned and walked away, satisfied with her final word. I didn't follow. I simply stepped aside, slipped past the shadows of portraits on the wall, and exited through the side door where the car waited. I didn't go straight home. I needed the air. I rolled the window down, let the cold bite into my skin as the car crawled along the narrow roads back to my apartment. By the time I stepped inside, my shoes were damp and my fingers stiff. I didn't turn on the lights. The city hummed beyond the window, warm and distant. I sat down at the small kitchen table, unsealed the envelope with slow hands, and unfolded the letter. Malric's handwriting looked steadier than I expected. Clean strokes, no shakiness. It was dated 23 days before his accident. "She looked like you. Or maybe you looked like her. Either way, I was 22, and I let my mother win." I reread that line 3 times before continuing. "Her name was Eleanor. I brought her home for one Christmas. She was brilliant, worked 2 jobs and still found time to draw little animals in the margins of newspapers. My mother hated her on sight, called her unpolished. Dorian called her seasonal. I didn't stand up for her, and I've regretted it for 20 years. There was no apology, just facts. His words weren't trying to comfort me. They were simply telling the truth. You weren't a phase, Aurelia. You were a pattern. One I should have stood up for a long time ago. I sat back in my chair, the letter resting flat on the table like a confession he never dared say aloud. And then I remembered the photo. I pulled it out carefully. It was older than I thought, edges worn, colors a little faded. The scene was some kind of charity gala. Isolde stood in the foreground, beaming with a woman on her arm. The woman wasn't named, but I didn't need a name. She looked like me. Not exactly, but enough. Same cheekbones, same smile lines when she wasn't smiling, same calm, observing eyes. But what stopped my breath was the background. Malric, barely in frame, standing still in a tuxedo too big for his lanky frame, watching them. His face was solemn, not angry, just removed, like he'd already given up something he didn't know how to get back. And around her neck, the woman on Isolde's arm, was the necklace. My necklace. The same one Malric gave me on our 3rd anniversary with a quiet, "This belonged to someone who taught me how to see people." Suddenly, everything clicked. That necklace hadn't been a casual keepsake. It was a thread. My eyes burned, not from tears but from clarity. I thought I'd been the only one to fight for Malric's love in the shadows, but I hadn't been the first. I stood and walked to the bookshelf, my hand brushing the spines until I found it, the letters of Rainer Maria Rilke. His favorite. I'd seen him read it so many nights, tracing each page like a prayer. On instinct, I flipped to the back cover, and there it was, a scrap of folded paper wedged deep behind the binding. I pulled it free, just one sentence: "If they strip you down to nothing, build from there." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. It wasn't poetry. It was a blueprint. I closed the book and set it beside the photo and the letter. I wasn't angry, not the screaming kind. What I felt was colder, clearer. The whole time, I'd thought I was losing something, but maybe I was just being handed the truth piece by piece. I rose from the table, walked to the drawer where I kept spare candles, and struck a match. The wick caught quickly. The flame flickered, tiny and alive. I placed it on the windowsill, beside the old stack of folded linens and a framed photo of us by Lake Esme. Then I sat down again, pulled out a legal pad, and uncapped my pen. That night, I lit a single candle and began writing the speech I was never supposed to give. That candle burned low as I finished the last line of my speech, ink smudging beneath my fingers. It wasn't anger that drove the words, it was clarity. For the first time in days, maybe weeks, my breath didn't feel like glass in my lungs. 2 mornings later, I got a forwarded email from the estate lawyer. No formal invitation, no embossed card, just a cold, clipped memo. The memorial gala honoring Malric Livingston will be held at the Middleton Room, Charleston. Dress code, formal. Guests, by family approval. Family approval, I muttered, rereading it while standing in my kitchen, coffee long gone cold. They didn't want me there. That was obvious. But Malric did. 1 week passed. I didn't call. Didn't ask if I was allowed. Instead, I stood in front of my narrow closet and pulled out the navy blue dress Isolde once sneered at. "You wore that to the opera?" She'd laughed. "No wonder they seated us near the exit." I smoothed the fabric with my palm. That night, I wore it again, with a quiet kind of pride she'd never understand. The gala was held in a chandeliered ballroom downtown, the kind with parquet floors and too many mirrors. When I walked through the entrance, the noise dimmed. Conversations slowed to murmurs. Some eyes darted away. Others narrowed in sharp disapproval. One woman even turned her glass so I wouldn't see her reflection staring me down. I kept walking. Dorian's voice floated from somewhere near the floral archway. "Did she sneak in?" he said to a man beside him, not bothering to lower his voice. I was guided, wordlessly, to a table tucked behind a column near the kitchen doors. The clatter of trays and servers passing by made it impossible to hear the string quartet, but I sat. I waited. Then the estate lawyer, Mr. Pritchard, stepped onto the stage. His voice echoed, mic crackling slightly. "Before we begin tonight's tribute," he said, eyes scanning the crowd, "there is a final instruction Mr. Livingston left in his amended will. It was not subject to approval, and it reads, 'The first speaker at my memorial shall be Ms. Aurelia Monroe.'" A ripple shot through the room. Gasps. Someone dropped a fork. Isolde froze mid-step at the far end of the hall, her wineglass trembling in mid-air. Dorian's lips parted, stunned. But the lawyer didn't blink. "Ms. Monroe, please." I stood slowly. The walk to the stage felt longer than it was. My heels didn't echo like others had. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the weight of every glance digging into my back. But when I reached the podium and looked out, I saw none of them. I saw Malric, not the man in the portraits lining the wall, not the polished legacy they'd scrubbed clean. I saw him half asleep in our garden hammock, fingers trailing through rosemary. I saw him barefoot in the kitchen, stirring grits with too much salt. I saw the man they didn't know because they never wanted to. "My name," I began, voice softer than I expected, "is Aurelia Monroe. Some of you may know me. Most of you were told not to." A quiet cough came from somewhere in the back, but no one dared interrupt. "Malric," I continued, "wasn't perfect. He didn't pretend to be. He used to say, 'I'm made of bone, not marble.' And that always stayed with me." I shared the story of the secret garden he built behind the estate's western wall, how he planted it himself after his father died. I told them about how he learned to cook to help me after I shattered my wrist one winter, and how he once drove 3 hours just to bring me a slice of blackberry pie from the place we first met. "But here's the truth," I said, breath hitching just once. "I wasn't his beginning, and maybe I wasn't meant to be his end. But I was never a phase. I was the part of him no one could erase, not even in death." I looked out into the room, into a sea of stillness. Then, from the very back, a slow, deliberate clap. One, then another. It was Malric's godfather, Arthur Hastings, a man with deep pockets and deeper memory. His gaze never left mine. Others followed, uncertain at first, then certain. The applause spread like a quiet fire, not roaring, not dramatic, but enough. Isolde turned, her heels clicking sharply as she strode toward the exit. Dorian followed, face twisted in something between confusion and disdain. Neither looked back, but no one else left. When I stepped down from the stage, I felt weightless, as if some invisible thread tethering me to their judgment had finally snapped. An older woman, silver hair coiled into a soft bun, approached and gently touched my arm. "You sounded just like her," she said warmly. I blinked. "I'm sorry. Who?" She smiled with something between mischief and memory. "You'll know soon enough." Before I could ask more, she'd melted into the crowd. Later that night, after the last handshake and the last stare, I climbed into my car and sat in silence. Streetlights flickered in soft amber across the windshield. Then I saw it. Taped beneath the passenger seat, just visible if you leaned low and looked sideways, was an envelope. Not addressed, not stamped, just placed, hidden. I pulled it free, heart thudding, fingers trembling. Something he never meant for them to find. Back in my car, I sat for a long moment before reaching for the small, faded envelope taped beneath the passenger seat. My fingers trembled slightly as I peeled it loose. The edges were curled and the tape had yellowed. It wasn't labeled, no name, no date outside, just silent paper holding something he never meant for them to find. I turned the envelope over, and on the back was a smudge of ink, just enough to catch my eye. Inside was a single folded letter. The paper was thick, the kind Malric always preferred for writing anything personal. As I unfolded it, the familiar curve of his handwriting struck me harder than I expected. If you're reading this, it means I ran out of time. And if I ran out of time, it means they won, or thought they did. But they didn't. Because I made sure you'd know. I didn't choose you because you were easy to love. I chose you because you were the only one who ever saw the whole me, and stayed. So now I need you to finish what I couldn't. I updated the will. I named you the executor of all personal assets, not just the ones they know about. There's a separate file, the Livingston Foundation, South Branch. It's yours now. They don't even know it exists. I built it for you. I hid it under your name for your protection. I chose you for a reason, Aurelia. Don't let them erase what we built. M. I didn't cry. Not immediately. I just sat there, rereading that last line until the streetlight flickered overhead and the ache in my throat started to pulse like a second heartbeat. Back at my apartment, I slipped off my shoes and hung my coat with slow, robotic movements. The letter stayed folded in my hand like it didn't want to leave my fingers. I set it down only long enough to fill the kettle. The room felt colder than usual, not from the weather, but from the weight of knowing he knew. He had seen the shadows long before they swallowed him. And still, he fought for me in silence. I opened my laptop and logged into the state's nonprofit registry. The search bar felt heavier than it should have. Livingston Foundation, South Branch. I hesitated, then typed. When the listing popped up, I leaned in closer. There it was. Aurelia Monroe, listed under Founding Director. My name. In bold, no aliases, no footnotes, no Livingston attachment. Just mine. I whispered into the dim silence. They thought I was a footnote. He made me a legacy. The tears came then, not loud or wild, but quiet, stubborn trails that refused to stop. I clicked through the registry. There were filings, board structures, program outlines. It had been set up for 3 years, operational, but it had never launched publicly. He was building a future that didn't need permission. And now, it was in my hands. That woman at the gala, she knew. Her words echoed. You sounded just like her. Like who? I reached into a nearby drawer and pulled out an old file box Malric once insisted I keep at my place. Backup, he'd said with a crooked smile. I never asked backup for what. Inside were passwords, separate ones, bank access, property deeds, even one for a garden account, some landscaping contractor with projects tied to South Branch campus. He'd been planning something they'd never approved. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the weight of every small, cryptic moment. Every time he pushed me to sign something in my maiden name, every time he made me double-check if something was truly secure, every time he held me a little longer after a family dinner with Isolde, he knew. And he didn't run. He built. It was nearly 1 a.m. when I drafted the email. Short, direct. Subject: regarding the South Branch body. I believe it's time we discuss Malric's final act. I'll expect a meeting next week. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Then I stood up, pulled out my small printer, hit print on every legal form and filing connected to the South Branch. Dozens of pages began sliding out, soft hums breaking the silence. I stacked them methodically, just like Malric would have. Halfway through printing, I walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and stared at my own reflection in the microwave door. They thought I was done. They had no idea I was just getting started. The printer finished with a soft beep, and that's when the doorbell rang, past midnight, with someone I never expected to see again. I didn't move at first. The sound of the doorbell echoed through my apartment like a ripple of something long buried waking up again. I looked down at the letter still in my hand, Malric's last words, his truth, his trust, and then toward the door, where the past seemed to be knocking. I slid the chain latch into place, cracked it open an inch, and there he was. Felix. Hair shorn short, cheeks hollowed, but his eyes, those restless, storm-gray eyes, hadn't changed. He looked worn, older than he should have for someone barely past 40, but he was sober, alert, present. "Aurelia," he said, voice low, urgent. "I wouldn't be here if it wasn't important." I studied him for a beat longer. Then, slowly, I unlatched the door and stepped aside. He entered quietly, clutching a battered canvas bag that looked like it had been dragged through 6 states. As I shut the door, he turned toward me and said, almost like an apology, "I saw what they did to you at the memorial. I saw it all." I didn't speak right away. I made tea instead. Hands steady now, maybe because shock had finally hit a ceiling. The apartment was dim, quiet, the kind of stillness that feels like it's holding its breath. When I handed him the mug, he wrapped his fingers around it like someone unused to warmth. "They think I'm still in rehab," he said. "Last I heard, they told everyone I ran off to Mexico. Guess that's easier than admitting what really happened." I sat down across from him, nodding for him to go on. "They cut me out. 5 years ago. I tried to blow the whistle on how Isolde and Bryce were siphoning donor funds from the Livingston Foundation into shell nonprofits. It wasn't even subtle. They were laundering it through youth programs that didn't exist. I went to the board. Thought I'd done the right thing." He gave a bitter laugh. "You know what they did? They dragged out every moment of my lowest days. Rehab, the arrest back in '09, that bar fight I got into during my first relapse. Turned it into a story about how Felix's mental health made him unstable. They froze my accounts, blackballed me from every charity I ever worked with. I became the cautionary tale." I whispered, "But Malric?" He looked up, and that's when I saw it. Underneath the roughness, the lines, the tired posture, there was something like hope. Malric believed me. He told me he'd seen signs himself. That's when he started making changes, quietly. He pulled some assets out of the main fund, created a South branch that wasn't linked to the core trust, said it was protection, said you were the only one he trusted to run it if something happened. Felix reached into the bag and pulled out a flash drive wrapped in electrical tape. He told me, "If I don't make it, this goes to Aurelia. She'll know what to do with it." I didn't reach for it yet. My eyes were locked on his. "You were the one he was always trying to protect," Felix said, even when he didn't say it outright. I finally took the drive and walked to my laptop, plugging it in with a breath held too long. Inside were folders, more than I expected. A full audit trail, dated correspondence, flagged transactions, even voice memos. One of them was a clipped, tense recording of Bryce talking on the phone, his voice sharp. "No, don't email anything. Wire it through the Jacksonville account. Use the girls' camp again. It's clean." Felix stood behind me. They built an empire on lies, and Malric knew the walls were cracking. I copied everything to a cloud backup, then again to my private server. I wasn't going to risk this falling into the wrong hands. "You said they think you're still in rehab," I asked quietly. "Does anyone know you're here?" He hesitated. "I was followed. Earlier tonight, near the bus station. I think they know I'm talking again, but I couldn't stay silent anymore, not after what I saw at that gala." I saw it then. The way his hands trembled slightly, the constant glance toward the window. Fear mixed with resolve. It was the same cocktail I'd been living on for weeks. "You shouldn't stay here," I said gently. "They'll be watching me soon too." He nodded, already knowing. "There's a 24-hour diner on Broad and Jenkins. I'll crash there a few nights if I have to. Just needed to get this to you." I grabbed my coat. "No, we'll go together. It's safer." We left the apartment just after 1:30 a.m., the streetlights casting long shadows. At the cafe, we chose a booth near the back. I ordered us coffee and something warm, grilled cheese and tomato soup, comfort food for broken nights. Felix stayed quiet while I uploaded everything to an encrypted drive, watching the progress bar crawl forward like the beginning of something massive. As I stared at the files, a weight lifted in pieces. Not relief. No, this wasn't over. But direction. A path. "This isn't just about Malric's will anymore," I said slowly, thinking aloud. "It's about everything they buried under polished smiles and donation galas." Felix glanced up. "So, what now?" "We go to the foundation board. We use this." I tapped the flash drive. "They buried a man's work, but I'm going to make sure his legacy outlives their lies." We sat in silence for a while, both lost in thoughts too big for words. I was about to stand, ready to head back and plan the next steps, but then the door opened, the little bell above it jingled softly, and a gust of early morning air swept through. And the woman who stepped inside? She froze the second her eyes landed on me. I didn't recognize her at first, not fully. She had that Livingston sharpness about her, but her posture was hesitant, almost haunted. Her coat was still half-buttoned, and she clutched a messenger bag like it was some kind of shield. Felix turned his head slightly, but it was me she stared at. "Mara?" I asked quietly. Her eyes welled up, but she didn't blink. "I need to talk," she said. "Please." I nodded and motioned to the seat opposite mine. Felix raised an eyebrow at me, but I gave him a subtle nod. We weren't in the position to turn away allies. Not now. We ordered fresh tea. Mara didn't touch hers at first. Her hands trembled as she rested them on the table. "I saw the footage," she began, voice barely above a whisper. "The memorial. I didn't know what they were going to say about you, or how far they'd go." "They held a funeral for me," I said, a touch of bitter humor in my voice. "And yet here I am, still breathing." "I never wanted any of this," she blurted. "I stayed quiet for too long, but Malric, he was trying to stop them. He told me the truth about the restructure. I buried it." My stomach tightened. "You what?" Mara pulled a folded sheet of paper from her bag. She slid it across the table, her hand still trembling. "I was supposed to submit this. It's a sworn statement. The real vote count. Malric had already cast his ballot opposing the restructure before his accident, but Isolde said it was invalid because he wasn't present at the final meeting." I took the paper. Her name was at the bottom, a quiet confession hidden in black ink. "She leaned on you," I said. "Threatened you?" Mara nodded. She didn't have to say much, just reminded me where my paycheck came from, and that if I wanted any future with the foundation, I'd do the right thing. "I'm not proud of it, Aurelia." Felix leaned forward. "Why now?" "Because I watched them erase you," Mara said, tears welling again. "And it didn't feel abstract anymore. It felt personal. Like if they could do that to you, they could do it to anyone." She unzipped her bag and brought out her laptop. After a few keystrokes, she turned the screen toward me. Screenshots from the internal board portal, backdated edits, the system administrator logs, all of it lines up with what Felix gave you. I didn't respond right away. I looked at her. This younger cousin of Malric's who had always kept her head down, played the loyal employee, the silent junior board member. She had been part of it, but she wasn't staying quiet anymore. "I need you to do more than show me," I said after a moment. "When the time comes, and it will come, you testify." Her eyes widened. "You mean in court?" "Not necessarily," I said. "But the board will call an emergency meeting when I submit the drive Felix gave me. That's when I need you, in that room, telling them what you just told me." Mara hesitated. I can't let them know yet. Please, let me stay anonymous until the first review." I thought about it, then nodded. "You have my word, but once it's official, once the board begins formal review, you go on record." She exhaled like she hadn't breathed in days. "Deal." Felix glanced at me with something like approval. "She's risking a lot," he said softly. "That takes guts." Mara gave him a small smile. "So are you. You could have disappeared." "I did," Felix said, "but truth doesn't stay buried, not forever." I checked my phone. The sky outside was beginning to pale at the edges, night slowly giving way to dawn. The cafe had emptied except for us and a young man at the counter cleaning coffee machines. The world felt strangely still, like the air before a storm. "Let's get out of here," I said. "We need to upload all of this securely before anyone in that house even pours their morning coffee." We gathered our things. Outside, the cold had softened slightly, the kind of pre-dawn chill that hinted at spring. 10 minutes later, we found ourselves in a quiet co-working lounge a few blocks away. Mara swiped us in. Apparently, she still had some perks, and we settled in a corner booth. The lights were soft, the room nearly silent except for the faint hum of routers and the occasional clack of keys. Felix sat beside me, Mara across. We uploaded the drive files first, then the screenshots, then her scanned statement. I watched the progress bar fill like someone threading justice back into broken seams. When it was done, I created a secure cloud backup and sent encrypted copies to my lawyer, a tech consultant I trusted in Seattle, and an off-site vault service Malric had once recommended. I wasn't taking chances. Mara looked at me. "What happens now?" I stared at the monitor, fingers resting still on the trackpad. "Now," I said, "we wait for the right hour, and we hit send to the board." The sun had just crested the edge of the skyline when we stepped outside. I hadn't slept, but I didn't feel tired. I felt something tighter, sharper, like steel tempered in fire. That evening, after parting ways with Mara and Felix, I returned to my apartment. The quiet there was different now, not empty, but watchful. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat by the window. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. The text read, "You think you're clever? You're just a phase. We'll erase you like the rest." I stared at it, then smiled, because this time, I wasn't standing alone. I turned to Felix and Mara and said, "It's time they realize I'm not going anywhere." Felix and Mara followed close behind as we stepped out into the late afternoon chill. The courthouse steps echoed beneath our feet, but I didn't feel cold. Not anymore. Something had shifted. I wasn't walking out the same woman who had walked in weeks ago. I was steadier now, clearer. A week later, I found myself standing in the marble lobby of Whitlock & Green, the law firm that had represented Malric's estate for generations. The grand building sat at the corner of Arlington and Beacon, its stained glass skylight pouring soft light onto the checkered floor. I had arrived early, as instructed. No one else was there yet. I stood still for a moment, letting the hush of the space calm my nerves. I had chosen a simple navy dress. No jewelry, no makeup, just a plain leather folder in my hand. Dignity. That's all I wanted to bring into that room. Not revenge, not spectacle. Just the truth. A paralegal led me through heavy oak doors into the main conference room. It was exactly as I remembered it from years ago when Malric had once brought me along to observe a board strategy session. The same long mahogany table, the same scent of old paper and polished wood. I sat at the far end, closest to the windows. Alone, at first. But it didn't stay quiet for long. The door opened again. Isolde entered with the kind of stride that announced ownership. A white cashmere coat hung over her shoulders like a cape. She scanned the room, saw me sitting where I was, and scoffed. "Did someone let the help in early?" I didn't flinch. The attorney, Mr. Landon Green, gray-haired, precise, stood from his seat at the center of the table. "Miss Fairborn is here by legal appointment. She will be seated as the primary beneficiary." Isolde froze mid-step. Her mouth twitched. Then she laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "You're joking." He gestured calmly. "I assure you I'm not." Other family members began to trickle in. Aunt Camille with her stiff pearls and silent judgment, Hugo still dressed like every hour was a golf hour, and Mara, who gave me the briefest nod. Felix came last, quiet as ever, slipping into a chair beside me without a word. Once everyone was seated, the room fell into a tense, waiting stillness. Then Mr. Green pressed a small remote, a soft click. The speakers hidden in the ceiling came alive, and then his voice. "Hello," Malric said. "If you're hearing this, I'm gone, but not silent." A ripple moved through the room. His voice was calm, firm. No tremble, no doubt. "I've had time to think, more than most people get, and I've realized something important. Death shouldn't be a mess left for others to clean up. It should be a final statement, one that tells the truth." I felt my throat tighten. Across the table, Isolde shifted in her seat. "I want to talk about Aurelia." Heads turned. "She wasn't part of this family by name, not on paper, but she was more than any of you ever allowed her to be. She loved me when it wasn't easy. She stayed when I wasn't proud of myself. She believed in what we were building, even when my own blood didn't." Isolde whispered something under her breath. Camille looked away. "We had our own ceremony, private, sacred. I called her my wife and she called me her husband, and I wish I had made it legal. That's my only regret." He paused, then continued. "So now, I'm doing what I can. While I still have a voice." Mr. Green turned off the recording. No one moved. The lawyer cleared his throat and pulled out a thick folder. "This is Malric Hastings' final notarized will and testament, dated 8 days before his passing." He began reading aloud. "To Aurelia Fairborn," he read, "I leave the following: 51% of all voting shares and stock holdings within Hastings Development Group, full ownership and occupancy of the residence on Dorchester Avenue, and sole control and direction of the Malric Hastings Foundation." Gasps. Audible gasps. Isolde's jaw dropped. Camille's lips parted, stunned. Hugo swore under his breath. Even Mara looked shaken, though not surprised. Mr. Green continued, "To Felix Yarrow and Mara Levingston, I appoint you as co-trustees of the foundation, effective immediately. All previous trustees, including Isolde de Vries and Camille Everlyn, are hereby removed." Isolde surged to her feet. "This is a lie. A fraud. You people tricked him. He wasn't thinking clearly. She got to him." The lawyer didn't flinch. "The will is legally binding, accompanied by sworn video testimony and verified mental competency documentation from 3 independent evaluators." He slid a USB drive across the table. "I also have the footage of Malric reading the will aloud, uncoerced, in full awareness." Isolde's cheeks flared red. "You let a waitress steal our name." I rose. "I never stole anything. I built with him. You tried to erase that because it didn't fit your version of legacy. But legacy isn't built through control. It's built through love. And you never loved him. You just claimed him." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy. True. Camille's hand trembled. Hugo stormed out, muttering, "I knew this would happen." Mara looked down at the folder in front of her, then over at me, eyes soft. She didn't speak, but she didn't have to. I gathered my things slowly. I didn't rush, didn't gloat. This wasn't victory, it was clarity. But just as I reached the door, Mr. Green called out, "There's one last thing you need to hear." I paused at the threshold, my hand just inches from the doorframe, when the lawyer's voice cut through the heavy air behind me. "There's one last thing you need to hear." I turned slowly. The others had already started to disperse, Camille wiping at her eyes, Hugo still shouting into his phone, and Isolde pacing furiously near the window like a lioness caged in her own pride. The lawyer walked up and held out a slim envelope and a small cedar wood box. "From Malric," he said gently. "He left strict instructions. You were to open this only after everything else had settled. Alone." I took it with both hands, nodding silently. I didn't trust my voice just yet. 3 days passed. 3 long, breath-held days. The Cambridge house, the one they all assumed I'd never set foot in again, was quiet now. Too quiet, in a way that felt foreign. No insults whispered from across a polished marble table. No gaslighting masked as polite conversation, just the tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway and the soft clink of a spoon in a ceramic mug. That afternoon, I stepped out into the garden we'd never gotten to finish. The air was cool, the kind of crisp that clung to early autumn. I'd trimmed back the ivy on the back trellis earlier that morning, more out of ritual than purpose. The flower beds still held the markers Malric had labeled with his messy penmanship. "Herbs for Sunday roasts," one still read. His humor had always been simple, grounded. The box Felix had delivered sat beside me on the old wooden bench. I hadn't touched it since bringing it inside. I think part of me feared what it might unlock, not just in content, but in me. Now, with only the sound of rustling leaves and a lone squirrel skittering along the fence line, I opened it. Inside was a single, neatly folded letter. Not typed, not notarized, just ink and paper in his hand. His handwriting had always leaned a little left, like it too, was hesitant to speak too loudly. I unfolded the first page and began to read. "My dearest Aurelia," it began. "If you're reading this, then I've left this world, but not you. Never you. I never told you enough, but you were the only peace I ever had. My sanctuary in a family that knew how to perform love, but not live it. My fingers tightened around the paper. You stood beside me when it would have been easier to run. When they tried to paint you as a gold digger, you just kept showing up, cooking meals, reading beside me, laughing at my bad impressions, loving me, not my name, not my bank account, just me. A tear slid down my cheek before I noticed it was there. He continued, I'm sorry I didn't stand louder for you while I was alive. I thought I had more time. I always thought we'd get there, wherever there was, so I made a plan. After our wedding, I was going to cut contact with all of them. You didn't know that, did you? I wanted Oregon, a small place, somewhere green, by a lake, somewhere the only thing louder than your laughter would be the wind through pine trees. A pause. I looked inside the envelope again. Tucked behind the letter was another folded sheet. He'd labeled it simply, For Our Future. I unfolded it, and there it was. A deed. My name. A property near Wallowa Lake, Oregon. The paper was aged just slightly, dated 4 months before he passed. There was even a small sketch done in his hand. A cabin outline, trees flanking it like arms around a child. I had the lawyer draft everything so they couldn't touch it. They'll try. Isolde always does. But this is yours. You earned it not by blood, but by grace, by patience, by being exactly who you are. And at the bottom, in bigger script, thank you for seeing me. Not the legacy, not the brand. Me. Now go. Live. Really live. I read that last line 3 times, and for the first time in weeks, I let the stillness wrap around me like a quilt. No one yelling my name. No one demanding I prove I belonged. The sun had dipped just behind the chimney line when I went back inside. The hallway smelled faintly of sage. Malric had always said it made the house feel like something was being healed. Maybe he was right. I wandered through each room, not as a guest, not as an outsider, but as someone finally allowed to simply be. The piano still held dust from untouched keys. His study still had a pair of his old glasses left on the desk. I ran my fingers lightly over the top of the frame and didn't flinch this time. He was everywhere, but in a way that no longer haunted, just lingered, gently. In the living room, I sat for a while. Then I reached for a pen. I pulled a piece of stationery from the drawer and scribbled a short message. Folded it, walked over to the mantel, and placed it just above a photo of us. One no one ever got to see. To those who thought I came for the money, thank you. You finally saw me, really saw me, and now you can watch me walk away, just like he wanted. The house didn't echo when I shut the front door behind me. The keys were in the bowl where he always kept them. I grabbed them, slid into the driver's seat of the car he'd insisted I drive instead of him, because you're better at city parking, he'd joked. Outside, the air had shifted again. Warmer now, like the garden itself was breathing easier. I stepped into the sun, one hand on the car door, the other holding the deed, and didn't look back.